The Earth plays host to a multitude of environments, each with their own varieties. All manner of forests, mountains, plains, drylands, wetlands, and so on cover the planet, but a few have drawn people's attention more than others. Sure, forests or plains might show up commonly, but because of how common or normal they are, they don't have the same literary weight. A desert, on the other hand, comes with strong tropes attached to it. Like a volcano or the oceans, they're a set piece. It's most visible in sci-fi. There are desert and ocean planets, but a world with forests is usually just temperate and features a full range of biomes. It's the extreme, unusual, and interesting ones that get entire worlds dedicated to them. In fantasy, one of the most drawn on and expanded upon locations is the underground. Real-life caves can be incredibly beautiful. Their fascinating rock formations and unique ecosystems have caught the interest of many people, and their dark and dangerous nature has certainly helped as well. Caves naturally stir people's adventurous spirit, a challenge to be overcome with the potential rewards being sights no one has seen before and precious materials. So fantasy authors like to put things underground. Biomes, civilizations, ruins, vaults, anything you can find on the surface and then some. Naturally, over time a few strong tropes have emerged for what goes on beneath the earth. From a writer's perspective, being original in an underground setting is actually unexpectedly difficult. An audience is willing to give a lot of leeway and suspend their disbelief for established tropes. For example, if a dark, low magic setting includes a floating castle reached via beanstalk, as long as the giants living there are suitably grim for the setting, the audience won't consider the flying fortress out of place, even though it should be way too magical compared to everything else. The trope is so well established and the fairy tale so well known that people don't think about it. Or if they do, they don't worry because they know the limits of the situation. They don't have to worry about wizards suddenly running around the place throwing fireballs. The flip side for this is when you break established tropes, people pay attention to learn how you're doing things. For an underground setting, that can be a problem in a modern hard magic environment, where realism is often praised. Realistically speaking, living deep underground is just not practical. Plenty of world-building guides exist that go into the realism of living underground, so I will be focusing on the purely fantastical. We'll touch on some of the practical implications, but only as far as there are opportunity to make interesting additions. In real life, caves are fairly plentiful if you're in the right area. Plenty of them form expansive networks with kilometers of tunnels to explore, but for fantasy we often want a little more. There aren't just a few caves, there are caves everywhere. Dig deep enough in any location and you're likely to hit a tunnel or two. Dig even deeper and you reach a whole different realm. A land crisscrossed with tunnels and vast caverns. Different works will give this land beneath different names, but likely the most recognizable is D&D's Underdark. The Underdark stretches across the entire world. It consists not of one single cave network, but a collection of caves and tunnels, some of which do not connect or have been joined artificially. This type of underground provides the most room for world building. Entire nations can go down there with their own politics and relations. Having as much space underground as possible also naturally offers the most opportunity to create unique biomes and features. It can also be a danger for those prone to world builders disease, who can quickly find themselves filling in layer after layer of deeper down kingdoms. A more restrained approach focuses on caves in those areas people expect them. A regular forest might only have a few caves that it would in real life, but a mountain range will be absolutely filled with them, stretching far deeper underground. This style is a comfortable middle ground between putting the underground world building in a single cave set aside for it and having an entire underground world. It provides enough room to still have kingdoms and unique biomes without making the underground a presence across the entire world. Of course, in all cases, how much of a presence the underground is a factor authors can control. Before characters can go traipsing through the deep, they have to get down there. There needs to be some ground for the surface to rest on after all, so the really big cave networks start further down. Only a few of them have entrances on the surface. How long and treacherous those tunnels are determines how accessible the two worlds are to each other. A full Underdark can have different sections starting at different depths. In a mountain setting, the caves are more easily accessible, since they technically start above ground level high in the mountains. Finally, there is the option of not having an expanded underground world as part of the world building at all. Instead, everything is concentrated in one cave system, usually of unnatural origin. A massive dungeon, ancient tombs, sunken civilization, or something along those lines. Many fantasy worlds concentrate their story around such a feature and its exploration. This obviously limits the scope a little, since there is only one point of contact between the underground and surface world. The world building for the underground is no longer tied into the entire surface. On the other hand, however, a deliberately unique and possibly unnatural or artificial cave also opens up options to put things down there that would not fit in with the rest of the world. As always, there are trade-offs where some things become easier and some harder. Life in the dark is very different. Without the sun providing energy, food is more sparse, and organisms have to get a little more creative to survive. Underwater, that leads to the many weird and wonderful species of the deep sea. Underground, it generally means that there isn't much life about. Without the scrap sinking down from the surface, there just isn't enough food to sustain anything but microorganisms. But some life forms are still associated with dark places, and these form the basics of our world building here. The creepy crawlies and critters that live in holes, burrows, and dark attics are great for populating caves. And following the trend of things getting big in the deep oceans, cave dwellers are also scaled up. Giant spiders, rats, moles, and every sort of insect are common picks. Anything that naturally lives in the underground anyway doesn't require much world building, so an author can just increase the depth and numbers they're found at. There is also the eldritch and unusual that lives in the water. People's imagination for underground life is already influenced by the deep sea, so it makes sense to directly port some creatures over. Natural caves are mostly formed by water, and many of them are flooded or contain streams. These are inhabited by strange blind cavefish and insects. In a fantasy setting, the biosphere gets expanded to include more famous examples of strange ocean life. Anglerfish and octopuses both feature and serve as inspiration for a myriad of entirely fictional creatures. Tentacles are prominent in eldritch horror aesthetics, and many of those monsters fit right in those caves that are dark in both meanings of the word. Through that association, even animals that don't quite fit in can be redesigned to suit the underground. Giving monsters or animals pale or translucent skin is a quick way to make it look like a variant adapted for living without sunlight. But perhaps the greatest star of underground life is the mushrooms. Not quite plants, not quite animals, and heavily associated with the dark and the dank, mushroom forests, groves, and infestations are a staple of underground settings, especially the ones that glow. These allow an author to redesign an entire ecosystem that feels natural by simply replacing the green plants that don't fit in with fungi that do. And mushrooms aren't the only things that don't look out of place underground. Lichen, algae, and moss also fit in, even if they wouldn't be able to grow without sunlight. New plants that bear resemblance to surface ones can work with some alteration. Much like the pale or translucent skin on animals, making a plant glow or giving it a slimy surface makes it look alien enough to feel at home. These eldritch-looking ecosystems can have as much variety as surface ones, with forests, swamps, and meadows, though for obvious reasons you wouldn't expect open plains underground. The culmination of, or starting point to, depending on your perspective, all of this, is the people and nations that an author can put underground. Who lives and acts underground, and how they do so really is central to the entire premise of worldbuilding there. The reason I say it can be the start or conclusion is because what kind of environment is available strongly shapes how people fit in. If an author starts from the perspective that they want to build a limited underground contained in mountain ranges that doesn't stretch very deep, then while a city or two can go below, there will not be entire nations and a full spread of biomes. The size of the underground constrains how big of a settlement and political landscape fits there. Likewise, if someone wants to world build a wide spread of fantasy races, each with multiple cultures spread across nations, then they are more or less required to have a full world or at least region-spanning underrealm. And if it's far from the surface, it will require some world building of ecosystems to feel right. On the surface, people are assumed to live in all climates and locations. Underground, it's far more important to match the environment and the civilization to each other. Once a type has been decided, there's a lot of interesting details to be worked out. Being underground naturally changes the way a civilization interacts with the world. It's notable that many fantasy settings portray underground nations as city-states. Even ones that are in theory countries with many cities still function in a far more disconnected and independent way than their surface counterparts. This comes as a result of two things. First, the perception of the underground as dark and dangerous, means that tunnels connecting cities are often far more dangerous than roads. The cities are isolated and required to be self-sufficient, which is the second point. A city in a fantasy medieval setting is a central focus for a region. It is supplied by and oversees vast countryside and smaller villages. There isn't much to be had in the way of countryside underground, it's mostly just rock. So cities tend to be world-built more like fortresses in the dark against the many monsters. These two aspects feed into each other. As the caves are perceived to be more dangerous, the cities get world-built more defensively. As civilization holds itself up more tightly, the surroundings are left abandoned and crawling with ever more danger. This doesn't stop sprawling underground empires, however, and if anything makes them more dangerous. To remain functional in their hostile environment, they must be able to travel between safe spots, and so everything down to the smallest merchant caravan is supplied with capable guards. It's no surprise that many worlds portray more and more ruthless people the deeper you go. What I've provided here is an overview of the sorts of environments often found in underground worldbuilding, and far from a comprehensive list of everything on offer. There is still much to be said about the differences of life underground, such as the lack of seasons and weather, how to keep time, and how the scarcity and abundance of different materials might affect a civilization. Beyond that, there are always the hard world-building questions of how to make this all a bit more realistic. But I think when world-building something as inherently fantastical as a whole world underground, it serves an author better to lean into the themes and aesthetics established by existing works than to fret about scientific detail. Underground worldbuilding is some of my favourite, and I certainly intend to make more videos on this subject. When using fictional wildlife to populate the underground, it's in many ways not much different to what you would build on the surface. All the little questions about how certain things would affect culture and technology and all those favourite world-building topics are still the same. And many of the answers are familiar since caves are hardly a new invention. And yet when viewed as a whole, underground worlds present a vastly different experience to go through and canvas for an author to work on. The little differences add up to something big. I would go as far as to say that civilizations flying in the sky or even floating in space are often more recognizable than ones built underground. Despite so much of the Earth consisting of its namesake, and it being readily accessible, the ground beneath our feet does not capture as many imaginations. It's often quoted that people know more about the surface of the moon than the depths of the ocean, but I couldn't even tell you the equivalent for the underground. In fantasy, however, the underground is well loved and bursting with opportunities for interesting world building.